Hey, 8th graders, it's Miss Roberge here. I'm going to talk to you today about an assignment from Miss Willard called The East Windsor Civil War Connection, Henry M. Adams. So Henry M. Adams was a Civil War soldier, and he was from East Windsor. At least that's what I think right now. I haven't read this yet. I'm going to read it right now with you guys. Anyway, anytime where we can make a connection to our hometown, although I'm not personally from East Windsor, I'm from Enfield, so right next door. That's a pretty cool thing. In Enfield, we have some houses on Route 5 that were part of the Underground Railroad, and I always thought that was fascinating. I have never had a chance to tour them, but I would love to someday. So, to start with, I am going to read this entire thing. If you've already read it and you do not need to have somebody read it to you, please feel free to skip ahead. But I'll probably talk about some things too. So let's get started. Private Henry Adams, 16th Connecticut, maimed for life. Decades after Antietam, Henry Adams still suffered from the effects of 2 bullet wounds in his right leg. So, note, Antietam, that was a Civil War battle. Foul-smelling pus oozed from a wound in his knee, requiring dressing 3 or 4 times a day. Pieces of bone, one about an inch long, and even a 9/16-inch piece of lead from a bullet that wounded him, were extracted from his leg. For years, Adams often required the aid of his wife to dress and even bathe. The old soldier's wounded leg was 2.5 inches shorter than the other because he claimed it wasn't set correctly in a field hospital after the battle, making walking difficult. Active in the 16th Connecticut regimental reunions after the war, Adams often required 2 canes to get around, and late in his life, he complained that he could not lay on his right side because of his war injury. His suffering right limb is a constant daily reminder of Army service and sacrifice, Abelina Adams noted in 1907. Abelina, who married Henry in 1871, was well acquainted with how Antietam could tragically and dramatically alter a life. Her first husband, Solomon Allen, a 24-year-old corporal in Company G with Henry, was killed in Antietam only 39 days after the couple was married. So think about that for a minute. You get married, and then your spouse goes to war, and within a month and a half, he has died, or she has died. That's a pretty terrible way to start a marriage. I'm right here now. After he was shot, Adams, a 22-year-old farmer from East Windsor, Connecticut, lay incapacitated in what was left of a cornfield for nearly 2 days before he was finally rescued. In an account written decades after the war, he recalled the moment he was shot and the long convalescence in hospitals in the Sharpsburg area. Between 4 and 5 p.m., we were ordered to charge on a certain rebel battery and take it, Adams remembered. We were prompt to obey as far as lay in our power, but just before we reached our battery of cannon, the hideous rebel yell arose from behind the stone wall, and we were shocked and repulsed. A short time later, a nearly spent Minié ball, a momentary sting, that was all, Adams recalled, burrowed into his calf. So basically, he was shot. A Minié ball is likely some kind of bullet. Seconds later, another bullet smashed into Adams' right leg, shattering his femur between the knee and thigh and knocking him to the ground. Private Arthur Parsons went to aid Adams and another wounded comrade from Company G, Private Leopold Hindenlang, but he was captured by the rebels. For 42 hours, I lay where I had fallen, unaided and unharmed, Adams noted. After the Confederates retreated south across the Potomac River on the night of September 18th, a Union search party found Adams the next morning. Carried by 4 comrades using an improvised stretcher, he was taken about 3/4 of a mile to a barn on Joseph Sherrick's farm and given a change of clothes and food. Later, he was taken to Sharpsburg's Lutheran Reformed Church, one of 3 churches in the town used as a hospital after the battle. Also suffering from chronic dysentery that made him deathly ill, Adams was tended to at the hospital by a, quote, dear attendant, his mother, who had traveled from Connecticut. So that's pretty cool. His mom came to help take care of him after he was injured. To this date, I had two wonderments, Adams noted. First, why did I not die? The other, why my limb was not set. Adams was moved again, this time to a house near Keedysville, where his mother continued to watch over him. I spent the winter months with other injured soldiers, 5 of whom had his mother as a nurse at the Big Spring Hospital, he recalled. Also known as Crystal Spring or Locust Spring Hospital, Big Spring was one of the largest Union hospitals set up after the battle. Nearly 7 months after Antietam, on April 1st, 1863, Adams was finally discharged from the Union Army because of disability and sent back home to Connecticut from Maryland. Was no April Fool Day to me. When my mother and her crippled boy on crutches started homeward bound, he bitterly noted, I received my discharge papers at Hagerstown, Maryland, and my full pay for doing nothing, except to be maimed for life and to draw a U.S. pension. After the war, Adams became a teacher, in Connecticut public schools, and eventually superintendent of the Hartford County Temporary House for Dependent Children, a position he held for 11 years before he retired. He developed a close friendship with Henry Tracy, a private in the 16th Connecticut who, as a nurse in Antietam, tended to Adams. A staunch Republican who held several political offices after the war, Adams was fond of travel, reading, current events, and telling stories of the Great Rebellion. It is his great delight to read stories of the stirring times of the Civil War and recall the battles in which he took part. The Hartford Courant reported on Adams' 75th birthday. In 1916, he even returned to Antietam and stood on the spot where he had lain on the battlefield 54 years earlier. Nearly 6 years later, on July 10, 1922, Adams died at age 81. With Civil War veterans in attendance, he was buried in Melrose, Connecticut. So here we have some notes from Miss Willard, and the focus question that she wants you to think about after having read that article is, what impact, both physical and mental, did the Civil War have on the everyday soldier and his family? So here's some more background on Henry M. Adams. Private Henry M. Adams was a soldier who lived in East Windsor when he enlisted to fight in the Civil War. His wife, Abilena, still lived in town while he was fighting. He was wounded in the Battle of Antietam. His story is quite interesting. It is in the PDF document in the other part of this assignment, which we just read, but if you need to see it, that is where it is located. If you need to see this about how to locate the PDF, please do. Miss Willard took her time to make sure that you could all understand. Here's some photos from the reading. These were not in the PDF. As we can see, this is the grave site in Melrose, Connecticut, which is part of East Windsor, I believe. And that is where he's buried. It would be really cool to see that. And Miss Willard wrote, in the September 26, 1862 Hartford Courant, Henry M. Adams was listed among the many casualties, dead or wounded, of Company G of the 16th Connecticut. So these newspaper articles are really cool. I've joined Ancestry.com to track my own history, and I keep finding newspaper articles about my family, and it is really interesting to read them. Finally, Miss Willard wrote here for you. You guys already know I'm a nerd. It's okay, Miss Willard. We still love you. I'm okay with it. I love old cemeteries. Henry Adams and his wife, along with other Civil War veterans, are buried in Melrose Cemetery in Melrose, East Windsor, Connecticut. It's a very cool place to respectfully visit, especially with Memorial Day coming up. Let me know if you'd go. I'd love to hear about it. Oddly enough, that would be an activity that would probably be social distancing friendly right now if your parent or guardian would be willing to take you to check that out. I'm definitely going to go check that out. I find that really cool. So let's get back to our focus question. What impact, both physical and mental, so on your body and on your mind, did the Civil War have on the everyday soldier and his family? So let's think about some of the things we read in the article. Physical impact. So to begin with, while Henry Adams was in the war, he was shot, right? And it said in the very first part of the article here, Henry Adams still suffered from the effects of 2 bullet wounds. Pus oozed. He needed dressing 3 or 4 times a day. He required the aid of his wife to dress and bathe. His leg was shorter because it wasn't set correctly. He had to walk around with 2 canes. He could not lay on his right side. So he really suffered. His body suffered. So let's try to sum that up on the grid here. He was shot in the leg. Years later, required daily dressing. That just means that his bandages, my cat's crying, his bandages had to be changed often. Couldn't lay on one side. I'm going to go here and keep writing in green, physical impact. Required the use of 2 canes to get around. The wound pussed. That's disgusting, but true. Daily, and he often needed the help of his wife. To get around and for changing those bandages. All right, so that's pretty awful. We know he went on to become a teacher and he had a job and he helped kids anyway, but I have to imagine this all made that a lot more difficult. So let's talk about the mental impact. Abelina Adams, his wife, as we read, she lost her first husband. So I have to imagine that was incredibly painful, only 39 days after they were married. So the mental impact for her was probably grief. Lost first husband. 39 days after marriage. But also, we have to remember about her. Then she wound up taking in Henry and marrying him. And she probably had a lot of trouble watching him suffer. She had to watch new husband suffer daily. That probably means that she had a lot of stress. Also, she was in East Windsor while these men were out fighting. So there was a lot of unknown. And just kind of like now, kind of like how we all feel now. We don't know what's going to happen. Probably some turmoil in her mind. She definitely would have had a lot of stress dealing with all of this. And because the country was at war, the everyday people were also dealing with things like the men were gone, so the women were working, but they couldn't produce as much. There probably was food shortages, shortages of supplies, all that kind of thing. All those kinds of things. Finally, we're going to look at Henry Adams and the mental impact that this would have had on him. So I don't remember if it was really mentioned here, but I do remember that it said that he was bitter. Yes, right here. It said, "Was no April Fool Day to me when my mother and her crippled boy on crutches started homeward bound," he bitterly noted. So he was maimed for life, and he gets a pension, which means he gets money from the U.S. government, but he felt like he did nothing. And he was bitter. That's an important word. So let's put that down. He became bitter. He felt that he was maimed for life. So that just means like he got hurt and he has his injury and he's going to have it forever. And I can't imagine how that would feel to know that I have an injury and it's never going away and I'm going to have to deal with that my entire life. But Henry Adams did go on to help kids. So maybe, and this is just me speculating, maybe this experience made him want to help other people. And that is a mental impact. It might have changed the way he wanted to interact in the world and given him a desire to have more purpose. Just a thought. That's a little bit of an inference from the article, but it would probably apply here. Anyway, that was it for this assignment. It was just those notes that you needed to take, and I think it was more interesting than anything to learn about somebody that actually lived in your town, and I think that's really cool. So I hope you enjoyed this assignment. I know I did. Thanks, Miss Willard, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great day.